Hi, my name is Lex Williford, and welcome to Advanced Creative Nonfiction. I'd like to begin this presentation where I ended my foreword in the Touchstone Anthology of Contemporary Creative Nonfiction. In it, I write that creative nonfiction, quote, may not be exactly what happened, but it's exactly how it felt, unquote. This statement, true as it may seem to those of us who write nonfiction, raises many of the most important and controversial issues nonfiction writers struggle with every day, especially when they're writing personal essays, memoirs, or essays with autobiographical elements. Because of the complexity of writing both what happened and how it felt, the goals of writing creative nonfiction may be elusive for some writers. They must try to be honest, not just with themselves, but with others. They must try to write with clear, elegant, sometimes lyrical prose without succumbing to overstatement, melodrama, sentimentality, purple prose, or an overstated sense of self-pity or victimhood. They must also strive to create what fiction writer John Gardner called a vivid and continuous dream, using the full power of the imagination to dramatize events and to create sharp images that carry emotion. Writers must also recognize the limits of even the best research or faulty memory, both the writer's own and that of those they might interview, as well as the complexity and limits of point of view itself, both in the literary and political senses, all the while trying to remain within the same ethical boundaries the most respected journalists must meet to remain both credible and powerful. But what is this strange hybrid genre, and how do we go about defining and writing it? The term itself, just a few decades old, seems slippery, evasive, even for some defensive, a kind of non sequitur defined by an implicit double negative, which most professional writers interested in precision and clarity try to avoid altogether. Fiction, defined primarily as a work of the imagination, even if part of it might be autobiographical or based upon a real place or events, is essentially a kind of lie in service of a larger fictive truth. But creative nonfiction, a non-untruth? Are the two implicit double negatives in the term supposed to cancel each other out like a kind of algebraic equation? Not exactly. Like all double negatives, at least for writing authorities like Strunk and White, it's probably best simply to make a statement in the positive, right? But we're stuck with the term, and we have to make sense of it in whatever way we can. If fiction isn't the truth, at least not the factual truth, then it follows that its opposite, nonfiction, must be the truth, right? Not exactly again. Worse, when we add the word creative, doesn't that suggest that we can fudge the truth a little? Wait a minute, hold on. If nonfiction's not fiction and fiction's not true, and we still can be creative with the truth anyway, then what's a writer of creative nonfiction supposed to do? I don't know about you, but my brain hurts when I try to think about it. So before we explore these questions and others in more depth, let's begin with a working definition. What exactly is creative nonfiction? Because the term itself is evolving, I thought perhaps the best place to go for an evolving definition is a source itself that's constantly being reappraised and rewritten. Wikipedia. Creative nonfiction, quote, also known as literary or narrative nonfiction, is a genre of writing that uses literary styles and techniques to create factually accurate narratives. Creative nonfiction contrasts with other nonfiction such as technical writing or journalism, which is also rooted in accurate fact but is not primarily written in service to its craft. As a genre, creative nonfiction is still relatively young and is only beginning to be scrutinized with the same critical analysis given to fiction and poetry. Although there have been instances of traditional and literary journalists falsifying their stories, Wikipedia goes on, the ethics applied to creative nonfiction are the same as those that apply to journalism. The truth is meant to be upheld, just told in a literary fashion. Also known variably as the new journalism or the fourth genre, according to Wikipedia, the genre can be understood best by splitting it into two subcategories, the personal essay and the journalistic essay. But the genre is currently defined by its lack of established conventions, unquote. This presentation will discuss these two subcategories a bit later in the context of personal and public events, then focus on the personal essay or memoir. What then do we mean if we say that creative nonfiction is an artful blend of what happened and how it felt, told with an artist's commitment to the truth and the highest quality of literary craft? We must first consider telling both the factual truth as well as the emotional and psychological truths of events. And that task may be far more difficult than it might seem at first glance. In a sense, creative nonfiction is ultimately a blend of both the objective and the subjective. And for some, especially those interested in just the facts, ma'am, therein lies the problem. The objective for the social sciences, and to a large extent for those who work as well-respected journalists, for example, is a rigorous effort to measure, quantify, or verify one's observations, in most cases using the scientific method or, if necessary, appeals to authority or witness testimony. The subjective, seen from the domain of the art, strives to focus on that immeasurable something that may be truer, the qualitative, the intuitive, the empathetic, and the imaginative. Not simply telling us how it felt through the use of abstractions, but showing us, allowing image and metaphor to carry that emotion. But because it's difficult to prove the subjective, and because we may not remember every detail of a particular memory, we sometimes must rely on invented images and metaphors that arise from the stories we tell. Imagine details and dialogue as proofs in a different sense, the proof of narrative authority and authenticity. This search for the truth, both objective and subjective, raises several questions. Do journalism and the social sciences create a more legitimate reflection of reality than poetry or fiction? Do fiction and poetry create a truer emotional and psychological reflection of reality? Or does a combination of both the objective and subjective actually reveal a greater reflection of reality and the elusive truth? Such questions, of course, are almost impossible to answer. Once when I was an undergraduate trying to decide what I wanted to do with my life, majoring at the time in anthropology, I took a social sciences research methods course. The instructor, a young graduate student, an amiable guy with long red hair and a ponytail spiraling down his back, and a bright red beard he was always tugging on, was a geeky freak like me. But after listening to him discuss how to create statistical models for a week in class, I remembered what Mark Twain wrote about the three kinds of lies, damn lies, and statistics, and raised my hand. So, let me get this straight, I said. Social scientists turn people into numbers and add those numbers up, and that's the truth? Well, sort of, he said, and he tugged so hard on his beard his mouth popped open. That same day I dropped the class. The next day I changed my major to English and my minor to journalism, and I decided to write fiction on the sly. So much for objective reality, right? As Taylor Antrim recently wrote in the Daily Beast, quote, "Sometimes fiction is truer and more powerful than any memoir," end quote. Yes, I agree. Sometimes fiction can contain more truth than creative nonfiction, at least emotional and psychological truth. It's one reason why I write mostly fiction. Then and now, for me, fiction seems strangely more true than facts or statistics, more powerful, more interesting, certainly more dramatic and moving. But as I've discovered the hard way, autobiographical fiction has its limits too, especially when the facts, as the old cliche goes, are stranger than fiction, usually much stranger. And actual events may not work in fiction because they rely so heavily on accident or coincidence that they seem completely implausible, the kind of cheap narrative trick like Deus Ex Machina that makes readers roll their eyes and want to throw a book through a window. As I've told many students, it's not enough simply to say, "That really happened to me." A writer must make even a true story seem credible on its own, not just by telling but by showing us what happened, making us relive moments as if we were there with an autobiographical narrator in a continuous present. And the only way I know how to do that is to use vivid images, details, and scenes as a kind of literary proof, even if they're at times invented. As poet and translator John Ciardi once said at a poetry reading I attended, "Poetry is not about emotion, it's about the experience of emotion." Writers then must recreate the vivid experience of what happened to evoke emotions in readers, and the details themselves must be authentic and believable, even if they may not be factual in the strictest sense. In fact, some writers argue only creative nonfiction can give them the leeway to map the difficult terrain of writing in scenes with powerful, significant details that must be, by necessity, an imaginative rendering or reinterpretation of memory, faulty or otherwise. Made more reliable, more credible, we can only hope, with deep research and a genuine effort to write the story as truthfully as we can from the inside out. The problem, of course, is where to draw the line between actual remembered and documented facts and an imaginative reinterpretation of lost facts or memories. What in fact makes a story, fictional or otherwise, memorable? So vivid and powerful that it's barbed like a cactus needle or a fishhook in the brain, something we simply can't extricate and must write about or read about, something that may even become a kind of obsession. And why, for example, do elderly people, even Alzheimer's patients, find themselves forgetting their most intimate loved ones in the present, but remembering loved ones long dead so vividly they still believe they're alive? Remembering events that happened to them decades before as vividly as the day they occurred. And why does some research suggest that as we tell our memories as stories to others many times over many years, as if we're passing a story from one person to the next around a campfire, we may actually change those memories, consciously or unconsciously, to make our stories more dramatic than they really were, or to make ourselves seem like greater victims or more heroic than we really were? Our long-term memories may and often do, in fact, change with these revisions, becoming a kind of invented memory, as true and vivid to us as something that just happened a moment ago. It's not so much that we lie purposely, but that our memories change as we grow older, trying to make sense of them. Part of the trouble, too, is with the nature of memory itself, something scientists have struggled to understand and still know little about. How are long and short-term memories formed, for example? And why do some memories evaporate immediately and others remain with us inextricably for a lifetime? Scientists have recently discovered a hormone in both rats and humans called IGF-2. When lab rats were given electroshocks, the levels of IGF-2 rose in the parts of their brains called the hippocampus, transforming short-term memories into long-term memories. The implications are complex and inconclusive, but they suggest that on a practical level we might create long-term memories simply to avoid pain or dangerous places. The irony is that as humans we might tend to be stuck with our most painful memories for the longest periods, the memories we have the most difficulty trying to resolve or recover from, the memories that, for some writers, create potential obsessions. The results of studies about post-traumatic stress syndrome bear out some of these implications, too. Some memories are so painful we simply cannot shake them off, as much as we might try, making it hard to concentrate or to sleep, making the job of writing about them both incredibly difficult and, to add another layer of irony, also the riskiest, the most courageous, and the most fulfilling to write about.